Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Luis Fernandez. College basketball is back, with men's and women's teams getting ready to tip off around the country. The season starts next week on Monday and Tuesday. The ACC knows a thing or two about basketball, or at least they used to. The women's side is still looking strong. 7 teams made the NCAA Tournament last year, but for the men's side, just 4. And it was just barely 4. UNC was in the play-in game. The fewest the conference has had in the big dance in decades. WRAL Sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy joins us now to discuss what's next for the Atlantic Coast Conference. Hey, Brian.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's look at what's kind of gone wrong for the ACC. How are they in this position? Is the basketball just not good anymore?
Well, there's a number of factors, right? One, you need look no further than the sidelines. Coach K is retired. Roy Williams is retired. Jim Boeheim, Leonard Hamilton, Jim Larinaga, Mike Bray. I mean, some of the big-name coaches in this league are all gone. Tony Bennett at Virginia. Lots of guys who have national championships in that list. Secondly, I think, NIL, transfer portal has certainly had an impact. And then there's been some uncharacteristically bad teams. Notre Dame had an awful season. Louisville had 2 awful seasons. Florida State. And that has hurt the league perception-wise as a whole. And then the last thing I would point out, and we could talk about perception all we want, they've lost a lot of games. I think the league went 2-14 last year in the SEC Challenge. It was over on day one. That sticks in a lot of people's minds when it comes time to assess who should get in the NCAA tournament.
I remember a quote from bracketologist extraordinaire Joe Lenardi, where he said, the ACC doesn't have a perception problem, it has a basketball problem. I guess option 1 is to play better basketball. How has the ACC approached this holistically versus like a team-by-team dynamic?
Right, and I wrote about that. That was in a story that I wrote in March before they even, only got 4 teams in, and North Carolina by the skin of their teeth got in. So the league, Jim Phillips takes this really personally. Like, he thinks he's in charge of the best basketball league in the country, and the fact that they're not the best basketball in the league in the country, I think is something that really, really bothers him. So this year, for the first time, well, not for the first time, but the league has gone from 20 conference games, down to 18. One of the big impacts here in the Triangle is that UNC and NC State will only play one time this year.
Wow.
There are 18 teams in the ACC. You play 16 of those teams once, or 17 of them once, and then you play one of them twice. And so Duke twice. So you play 16 once and one twice. And you'll miss one team as well. So it's the schedule is very different, right? Gone are those round robin days, at least that I remember as a kid, where you played everybody home and home. The league champion was a true champion in the regular season. Those days are gone. You won't even see every team, and you'll only see most teams once. But the reason that they did that, the reason they gave up the UNC-NC State game, is because non-conference scheduling matters more than ever. And if you play 2 ACC games where you're guaranteed to have 2 wins and 2 losses on your conference resume, if you play non-conference teams, in theory, you could win both of those games. And so you're piling up the wins. And talk to Bubba Cunningham, the UNC AD, who's the former chairman of the selection committee, and he put it in raw terms, right? You need to win about 80% of your games outside of your conference. And then that, by the time you get to conference play, it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. All your games are quad 1s or quad 2s. It gives you lots of chances to win big games and impress the committee. He said the last couple of years, the ACC has been at about 62 to 65% winning percentage in those non-conference games. That's really hurting the perception of the league. And then, if you don't perform well in your non-conference, and North Carolina hasn't performed that well, then you don't have as many quad 1 opportunities when you get into league play. So it all kind of works together. Now, if you expect to be a really good team, you can schedule up, try to get those big wins, get a top seed. If you're a really bad team and you don't expect much, well, having 2 more non-conference games gives you the opportunity to play teams maybe of your caliber and try to win those games. And that would help the league now. But at the bottom line is you got to win. You've got to win more games. And maybe there are some changes to the league that will help them do that as well.
Is the ACC slow to adjust to all of this? Because I feel like over the past few years, there are a lot of conversations about, the Big 12 gaming the net and, trying to figure out ways to make their schedules work. So like all these conference games they play are quad 1. And, so is the ACC slow to these changes or is it just kind of having to learn on the fly as college athletics just changes completely around you?
I think they're a little bit slow. The Mountain West and the Big 12 in particular, those two leagues have gotten a lot of credit for kind of gaming the system. One way the Mountain West has done it is not, and the Mountain West has a geography problem, right? It's tough to find games in that part of the country. So they've played a lot of non-D1 games that don't really count on your resume one way or the other, to make up for the fact instead of playing really, really low-ranked teams, they just kind of cut those games off. The Big 12's been able to make the system work for them so that every game becomes a quad one game. The SEC, nobody would accuse them of gaming the system. They just won a whole bunch of non-conference games last year, and they put a record, I think, 14 teams in the tournament. So, it's I think a little bit of everything, all the factors that we've kind of talked about. But then you also look at teams, that historically in the ACC should be good. Syracuse, NC State, maybe Georgia Tech, Virginia has fallen off a little bit. Like, there are schools that individually need to be better for the league to be better. Miami, went to the Final Four a couple of years ago, really down in the dumps last year. So as a whole, the league needs to do better, but individually, each of these teams need to do better too.
Let's take a quick break there. When we come back, what things could look like for the ACC this year and beyond? You're listening to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Luis Fernandez, joined by WRAL Sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy, and we're talking about the collapse and perhaps the rebuilding of the ACC men's basketball conference as we know it. So, Brian, it's interesting because obviously the ACC had 4 teams in the tournament. That is not good enough on the men's side historically. The way whatever way you slice it, that's not good. You look at, and the constant argument I hear from ACC truthers, if you will, is, well, look what happens when they do make it. You had Duke in the Final Four last year, NC State the year before that, UNC went on that big run, Miami went on this big run. So you've had a lot of different teams. Virginia won the tournament just a few years ago. You have a lot of teams that have represented the ACC well, but it's like the cream of the crop at the top versus like everybody else. So in the folks that you've talked with about this, what are the hopes that, how can all these changes they've made make things better for the conference as a whole?
Well, they'll make that same argument. They'll say, once we're not getting enough teams in, but once we get in, look at all the damage that these teams are doing. And so that's almost a cycle, and say, well, that means that we should get more teams in. And so, and it's probably a compelling case. They probably should deserve to get more teams in. On the other hand, when you look at the metrics, it's not like the metrics or the committee is slighting ACC teams. Like, in fact, sometimes I would argue they're probably getting the benefit of the doubt. There just aren't enough quality ACC teams out there to populate the tournament like there was in the past. Now, part of this, they went to 17 teams. They added Stanford, Cal, SMU. These are not traditional powers. Stanford actually had a really good season last year, finished above 500 in the league, and got zero consideration to get in the NCAA tournament. That used to be, if you finished above 500 in the ACC, punch your ticket, you're going to the NCAA tournament, and they weren't even really considered at all. So the league has work to do. I think it really has work to do in the non-conference, because that sets the agenda for the whole season. If you have a bad non-conference record, that gets in. Not only does that get in people's minds from November on, but it gets into these metrics that we've talked about, these numbers. And when it comes time to seed to seed the tournament or to select teams for the tournament, those numbers all matter.
So the changes they have made are large in scope. They impact the entire conference. Now, on a smaller level, this upcoming season as a whole, should the ACC be better? Are we going to see more than 4 teams, in the men's tournament come March?
It's hard to say right now. I mean, everybody's undefeated. Everybody thinks they're going. Certainly the changes at NC State, I think, are positive for the league and for NC State. I'll point out a couple other changes. We've talked about the schedule going from 20 to 18, but the league has also put in success initiatives and television viewership initiatives that will reward teams that perform better, that make the tournament, and they'll reward teams that get on television with more marquee games and attract more viewers. So they've put in a series of initiatives here to try to get teams to invest more in basketball. And we've seen that. NC State invested heavily in basketball, brought in Will Wade. North Carolina, which hasn't been playing to the level of North Carolina historically in the last couple of years, brought in a general manager, a very highly paid general manager, had attacked the transfer portal greatly. Duke consistently bringing in top-ranked recruiting classes, which in this day and age costs a lot of money. So, at least the 3 teams in the triangle are investing heavily. We've seen Miami hire one of Duke's assistants. We've seen Virginia, after Tony Bennett's, abrupt retirement, went out and got Ryan Odom, probably one of the best coaches, on the market last year.
The success of Louisville and Pat Kelsey this past year.
Yeah. So I think Louisville serves as an inspiration. Just because you're down, if you get the right coach in, you can be up very quickly. And I think that's what NC State's banking on. Virginia, Miami, Georgia Tech is hoping for continued improvement. Clemson's actually been pretty good the last couple of years. So, Pittsburgh, I'm reading some quotes from Jeff Capel, like, we're one of the teams that needs to be better. Pittsburgh, was a powerhouse in the Big East days and just hasn't been quite at that level in the ACC. So the ACC is trying to pull all the levers that they can to induce teams to develop and to pour resources into basketball. They're also doing the same on the football side. But when you have a behemoth like the SEC is showing that, yes, if you throw enough money and get enough good coaches, you can be really good at basketball very quickly.
Well, let's see if we end up getting a bit of an ACC renaissance this year. Remember, the college basketball season for the men and women's side start on November 3rd and November 4th. That's coming up in about a week. That is WRAL Sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lewis.
I'm Luis Fernandez. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines that help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.